This month, President Joe Biden announced a $2 trillion proposal to reshape America's industrial landscape into a post-pandemic green economy. The infrastructure plan includes revamping roads, highways, bridges and ports, promoting electric vehicles and clean energy, expanding broadband internet access, and investing in research and development, affordable housing, schools and job training. In order to foot the bill for this 8-year American jobs plan, the Biden administration aims to introduce major tax reforms. But can Mr. Biden convince Republicans in Congress to push this plan through, especially when this is just the first half of his recovery plan? Today, we'll discuss the first part of Mr. Biden's roadmap for America. I'm joined by Jack Gao, Programme Economist at the Institute for New Economic Thinking, and Nicole Smith, Research Professor and Chief Economist at Georgetown University Centre on Education and the Workforce. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. And well, to go straight into the questions, let's start with you, Jack. Now, Republicans, they're simply balking at the price tag of this recovery plan, as well as its scale. But on the other hand, some Democrats are saying that $2 trillion still isn't enough. What's your take on this?
There's a lot to like about this infrastructure plan from what we already know, and there seems to be a historical opportunity to get things right. Before answering your question, let me bring us to three trends just for context. Firstly, for decades, we've had an economic model that benefited a small number of people tremendously and left behind the majority of Americans, resulting in widening inequality and decline in middle class. The fact that zip code could predict a lot of things, your health outcome, your lifespan, your success in life, is an extremely telling example in that. Secondly, we've had the digital revolution, which spanned a good part of the last 15 years. That further demonstrated a lot of displacing and polarizing tendencies. If you're in the wrong parts of the economy, so to speak, it really didn't work that much for you. And thirdly, of course, we had the COVID crisis, which turbocharged a lot of these trends. A lot of this is to say that, sure, there's a lot of roads and bridges to fix, and as well as physical infrastructure, but how to productively engage more Americans in the economic process through, like you said, job training and education, through better childcare, invest in green recovery and climate resilience. These are paramount tasks.
So, well, Nicole, now there are many opponents to this plan given the huge price tag, and many are talking about the national debt that might accumulate and the cost it would bear on future generations. What do you think about this whole debt argument?
Well, $28 trillion is in fact staggering. And if you want to put it into perspective, we are already 100% of GDP. And that can actually round up to be close to $85,000 for every single American. If you think of it, what's your per capita responsibility? The interest payments on the debt is equally staggering. And if we want to add some type of historical context or historical understanding of the national debt, the most significant debt to GDP ratios were held during World War II. In layman's terms, we are in fact subsidizing consumption today and paying for it in the future. So for many, there's some concern, especially for Social Security payments, that will not be able to cover baby boomers when they retire. And for us, baby boomers were born between 1946 and 64, in another few years. But how much is too much? How much debt is too much debt? And what is the alternative? So we have the Congressional Budget Office telling us about the debt GDP ratio, and CBO is telling us that they're not too happy about the size of the debt. The Congressional Budget Office has forecast significant increases in the debt to GDP ratio by 2050. But if you specifically ask me what I think, I'm going to just go back to my economics training and tell you, and quote a famous economist in saying, in the long run, we're all dead. There is no doubt about the significance and magnitude of this far-reaching pandemic. We need to engage in this debt right now in order to foster further long-term growth and prosperity for the economy. So let's just cross that bridge in the future when we get there. We have to get over this hurdle first.
Right, so first of all, it's about getting livelihoods back on track. And Nicole, well, to pay for this massive infrastructure plan, the Biden administration's it's proposed a corporate tax hike from 21% to 28%. And it also plans to prevent big multinationals from dodging taxes by moving their headquarters to other countries. Does all of this seem feasible, especially when the OECD, for instance, has been trying to achieve a similar sort of global tax scheme for years?
Well, I'll start answering your question first by begging off the OECD-US comparison. You know, when you look at the OECD countries, we're looking at several different economies with different fiscal initiatives that share a common monetary policy. And then you're asking to compare it to just one country. So there's many reasons why it might be much more feasible for us to have this conversation than it is for the OECD. But taxing a corporation where profits are earned, regardless of the physical location, is fantastic in theory. I mean, that makes sense. That's where you're earning the money. That's where we should be taxing you. But it will take a machinery to get that done. And as you can imagine, there'll be, a lot of resistance to that. I'm not certain, this is a carrot issue. There's all stick here. You're going to have to be punitive, maybe significant penalties for all of these tax evasions. But the Biden administration hasn't always been talking about just looking at, this profit initiative. They've been talking about income tax on the wealthy. For some time, there was some talk about, the federal gasoline tax, which Biden rejected, but Buttigieg mentioned again, our transportation secretary. There's even some talk about moving the 28% to 25% on the corporation taxes. But we have to bear in mind that this new 21% corporation tax that we have now, that everyone can't imagine moving to 28 to pay for infrastructure, bear in mind that taxes hovered around 35% until 2017. So it was the Trump administration that moved taxes, corporation taxes, from 35% in 2017 back to 21%. So all of this outrage coming from the right is expected now, because they've fought long and hard to reduce their tax contributions. And now they're being faced with talks of increasing corporation tax again. I mean, for most of our conservative economists or economists on the right, you have lots of discussions about Trump's tax cuts. But they've, in the past, only succeeded in adding to the national debt. So I'm not as pessimistic about raising the taxes again marginally. Whether we take that to the 25% or we take it to the 28%, we need to get our economy up and running, and we need to fix the crumbling infrastructure, which, if anyone has traveled anywhere else in the world outside the United States, we realize how abysmally poor we've been doing, how poor a job we've been doing at fixing our infrastructure here.
Right, so very much needed revamp. And Jack, the US, well, it looks like the government's getting bigger. Its role in the economy is going to become bigger after this pandemic. But then the US has been known for its bottom-up innovation that produces massive companies, and many people have attributed this to small government and allowing an ecosystem of entrepreneurship to really flourish. So it seems quite significant that the government is ramping up its R&D and support for climate-related business initiatives. Do you think Biden is right to bet on this $2 trillion plan in order to make America retain its global economic and technological leadership?
I think the answer is yes. Market-based incentives and entrepreneurial spirits have actually operated in America, and it's all fine. What's perhaps less appreciated is the state has historically played important roles in steering the economy, particularly in times of transformational changes. This is true, for example, for DARPA funding for touchscreen and GPS, which are crucial for Apple. This is true for Tesla's funding from Department of Energy in its early days. This is certainly true for COVID vaccines from Operation Warp Speed. So the truth is, I think the US is still a world leader in many cutting-edge technologies, and in some cases by a wide margin. So keep competing and collaborating with other countries on next generation connectivity, on digital infrastructure, as well as physical infrastructure, on green energy, R&D, and commercialization are critical. What's perhaps equally, if not more important, is creating good jobs and bringing those benefits to the majority of American people while maintaining its technological leadership globally.
But Jack, as much as this is a made in all of America plan, some fear that it's a rather inward-looking plan because you're developing, producing and consuming all critical technologies at home rather than really reaching out to other countries and strengthening those trade links. So do you think that would be the case? Do you think US companies are going to become perhaps less global?
I think the Biden administration has made clear that America's back. And we've seen good signs, really, that America is re-engaging with the world in many areas, which is a departure from the previous administration. At the same time, there's this tension with ensuring, which is made apparent by COVID, supply chain safety, creating good jobs at home, and improving the lives of its own citizens. In other words, I think it is as much about pivoting back home, so to speak, as it is about improving the rules of globalization. It is a hard sell, but guess what? Globalization is your friend, not your enemy. Recent proposals on, for example, the SDR issuance, special drawing rights, or global tax reform that you and Nicole just talked about are precisely the kind of things we want to see to improve global rules. If we can get it right, I think healthy national economies could, in fact, coexist and rejuvenate spirits of trade and cooperation.
Right, so really strengthening economies within and between borders. And well, Nicole, now it seems most of the jobs in this plan, they're looking to create jobs in manufacturing and strengthening labour standards in building infrastructure. But we're seeing more and more work becoming automated, and also jobs they're becoming more and more irregular, they're having flexible work conditions. Do you think these jobs specified in this plan will be enough or lead to sustainable careers after this? Do you think we're going to see more details about this in the future as well?
Well, automation is indeed the big brother of mechanization that's been happening for the last, 30 years in manufacturing in the United States. But we shouldn't really consider automation to be the boogeyman of the jobs market. Automation has the ability to both create and reduce jobs, and naysayers seem to just focus on the reduction part. There was a report that was released about 8 years ago that said that, I think close to half of US jobs were at risk of being automated. And that isn't actually true. In reality, it's the complementarity of automation and humans, and not necessarily the substitution, that continues to define the future. So we need to think of automation as complementarity. Even the picture that you're showing now shows individuals working with machinery to improve output, to improve productivity. So what we've been focusing on at my center at Georgetown University is on the short-term and long-term training, what types of certifications, and what types of credentialing will be required for you to be successful at those jobs, at those new automated jobs, rather than think of some hypothetical machine that will totally replace every individual in the workforce.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time today, so this is where we'll have to end the interview. But that was Jack Gao, Programme Economist at the Institute for New Economic Thinking, and Nicole Smith, Research Professor and Chief Economist at Georgetown University Centre on Education and Workforce. Thank you both so much for your insights.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.